Thanks, everyone. As people trickle in, our nice, our nice group here. It's kind of funny. It's been, um, uh, Greg reminded me that this is 2 years of Dharmanaut Circle. This one, and so that sent me down memory lane. And the theme was already time, so I thought I'd kind of just talk. I wanted to actually, I had the impulse to do a little bit of where are we or how did we get here? Anyway, so, and forgive me if I have some slight allergies, so I'm a little sniffly, but I won't give you anything because you're on the other side of a screen. Um, maybe some ideas, maybe some inspiration, hopefully, or a good example of what not to do. But uh, so this whole thing, I think it started about 5 years ago. It was about a year before, you're a little bit more than a year before pandemic. I don't know. Chris Mays might remember when I started this. Do you remember when was the first psychedelic sangha?
I don't remember. I use my exobrain for that, but I can come back with an accurate figure if you give me enough time.
If you want to search. But in any case, and that was that was live, but once a month, and it had more of a psychedelic focus. And I had a group of friends who are still running events under the name Psychedelic Sangha in New York City, and I was kind of doing the West Coast thing. And then we of course had to go online with the pandemic, but I liked doing it. And then like psychedelic song in New York, they were doing sort of different things, and I'm kind of sick of the term. Like I'm interested in the topic, but I'm just sort of tired of the way that the term grabs attention and it kind of over focuses on things. The way that I've come to think about it is if you're in the room and the topic of psychedelics comes into the room, it's like all the energy is in that zone. It just takes over. If you're talking about like meditation and psychedelics, everyone's just going to start talking about psychedelics. I mean, not everyone, but it just tends to be a very domineering topic. And then I found that the more that we were going forward with this practice, the more we were exploring things that were sort of in the peripheral zone around like hardcore psychedelic practice. And I was kind of less and less interested in sort of centering that. And so for a number of reasons decided to re, re revive it. I refuse to use the word brand. Of course, it still happens, but to change the vibe, change the name. And I like the phrase Dharmanaut because it kind of reminds me of psychonaut and astronaut and the idea of being an explorer, the idea of being experimental, but also sort of being in motion as you steer. Like the word cybernetics has this idea of being a steersman embedded in it. So there's something about being a naut, an argonaut, a cybernaut, a psychonaut, a astronaut, where you're sort of already in motion and you're steering the way. Like you're not really coming from solid ground. It's like the thing is already flowing. And I like that idea because that's where we are. We're in these funny consciousnesses that seem to be spilling forward in something called time. And I'm going to talk about time a little bit more in a moment. And we're navigating on the fly, and it's always on the fly, and it's always ungrounded on some level. Even when we're feeling solid and secure and rooted and still, there's still a flow, and we're still kind of modulating a flow. Even the decision or the operation of resting and stillness is a kind of modulation of an unfolding. And the one time I had a kind of what in Zen you call a kensho, which is kind of like a mini awakening, an opening is probably a good way of thinking about it, like an aperture opening. And it actually felt a lot like an aperture opening, and I was suddenly like aware of a much deeper depth of awareness. It was very brief, about 45 seconds. But the most shocking thing about it was like, oh my God, it's like a awakening. What? Like, whoa, who am I? But the shocking thing was wow, everything just keeps moving. You know, the wind was still blowing, the leaves were still moving, there was still a procedure, a procession of events. And somehow I thought that it would be sort of like transcendent of that. And it was like, no, no, you're still in this flow. The flow is still flowing, you know, and they had some, it was very different. It had some nice affordances of that view. In that moment, I saw very clearly that we suffer because we attach and want to make that flow of events do something other than what it's doing. And you know that had, so it had a nice kind of spaciousness around those events. In general, I think it's kind of bad taste to talk about your experiences like that. I don't know why I have that idea, but I do. But the reason I brought it up was just that's always stayed with me, this kind of shock of the flow, uh, even in states of apparent timelessness, there's some kind of flow. So we keep flowing here 2 years in. And it's funny because we usually have a few new people each round, each time we meet, but it's always about like 15, 20, some 25 people. It's this nice kind of, you know, like zone that people get into. A lot of familiar faces tonight. So anyway, thank you for staying with me on this ride. If you've been around for a while, it's a fun little zone, and I really appreciate it. But I do want to talk a little bit more about time because you know one way of talking about what happens in the modern world, one of the really fundamental things happens on the level of sort of, I wouldn't even call it cosmology quite, but like our basic sense of the world is really fundamental to all modes of modes or moments of the history of human beings, where things taking place. You know, we're on the back of a turtle. There's a myriad of kalpas, or there's 6,000 years in the Bible. We always have a kind of cosmological template running in the back of our imaginations that is a feature of our contemporary moment. And there's no way out. And so in science, we are on this ball in space. It's impossibly vast. It's 15 billion years old, blah, blah, blah. It's sort of, no matter how much we might critique that or know that the science isn't quite exact, and the astrophysicists are starting to actually go, geez, guys, we might really have to like get down to brass tacks and redo this whole thing because we're starting to get different kinds of information that's contradicting our fundamental model. So we know we're inside of a model. You can tell just by keeping up with astronomy that we're inside of a model. And yet we kind of have to run with the model that we have in the sense of having an invisible template of how the world is. And one aspect of that as modern people, and of course, I think all of us probably have some mix where part of our minds are very science oriented and we believe we're on a ball of earth that's been, millions of years old, and, their time marches on, etc. And there's another part of us that maybe is interested in other ways of framing that story, maybe other kinds of cosmovisions that have a different character: Buddhist, Hindu, indigenous, made up, paranoid, science fictional. But on some basic level, a lot of us is still really invested, for good reason, in the models that we get. But one feature of that model, as being a modern scientific model, is that in its fundament, quantity is more important than quality. And the distinction between quantity and quality is a really vibrant one to kind of work with, because it really helps illuminate a lot of things. It really helps illuminate a lot of what happens with modernity, and what happens when science and technology kind of recode the real and begin to work with it. Because the success of science and technology can, be boiled down somewhat unfairly, but still, to the ability to quantify everything. And once you can quantify things, you can manipulate, understand, predict, program in a different way. But what is lost or at least set aside in that is this much more amorphous realm of quality. And quality is a lot harder to define than quantity. We all kind of know what quantities are. We just say quantity. Quality is like, well, the quality of something, it's feel, it's thingness, it's you-ness. It's like you kind of got to like lean on funny moves. And the philosophers do too. And of course, when philosophers these days are talking about consciousness, which some technologists, neuroscientists, and cognitive philosophers want to reduce to a kind of ephemera, a sort of spooge of neural circuitry that basically doesn't do very much, may not do anything at all, just kind of tells a story as this meat zombie goes and makes algorithmic decisions based on changing environmental circumstances. Um, that's a real quantity heavy model of what's happening with consciousness. And those in the cognitive in sciences, cognitive philosophy in particular, was saying, well, you guys aren't really explaining everything because there's something in consciousness that we can't just pretend isn't there. And that something is sometimes called qualia, which is different than quality, but it's related. It's that when you're staring at a red field, there's a redness there. There's a presence, a quality to redness that's not like anything else in the world. And of course, our entire experience is made up of those kinds of qualities all the time. So one of the ways that we proceed, and we do this throughout our daily lives, we do this when we're trying to fix things, when we're trying to understand money is a great example where like, yeah, you can think about it in quantities all the time. And yet there are certain aspects of it that we feel that there's qualities of relating to it that are also part of what we're trying to do when we, are deepening or trying to make up for all the problems that a lot of us have dealing with money. So we're often in a quantity quality thing. Another example is that's really close to home because we all get to face it is the fact that, again, to speak kind of overly crudely, but I think effectively, what modern medicine gives us at the end of our lives is more quantity. We'll give you more life, more time on the clock. But what is that life that they give you? It's kind of a half-life. It's kind of a living death in a lot of ways. Certainly at the end, when you're just, a vegetable that's being maintained with a little bit of eye fluttering on occasion. And well, let's keep it going. Oh wait, they got a UTI. We got to fix it. Don't want to die of a UTI, and they're already pretty much checked out. That happens all the fucking time. And that's a classic quantity over quality model because that's what the modern system delivers is quantity. More bucks in the bank, more, whatever, horsepower in your car, whatever, more numbers, more time on the clock. But if you go from a quality point of view, then you get into this different kind of decision making that people go to. Like they might go, well, the odds are if you do chemo and we go in there and cut some stuff out and might have to do it a couple times, then you might get 2 years. Or if you don't do it, you get 6 months, but you don't have to do any of that stuff. You don't have to take the poison. And some people go, yeah, fuck it, I'm going to do number 2. And what's that? That's a quality choice in a way. So a lot of the struggles we have over a lot of things is actually how we shift these very different modes. And this is all a preface to one of those invisible templates that we have is about time. And our template is that it's objective. The time really is measurable by a clock, just like whether it's atomic decay or we wind it up or we're looking at the stars to triangulate. There's one regular pulse that's running through the entire universe, and that's it. And then we know, oh, well, like space-time, it actually warps, and okay, yeah, so it doesn't really work like that, but we don't really think that way. In terms of this invisible template of time, it's regular. And what I found is it's taken me a long time to really, I don't want to say let that go, but to shift into a world where I relate to time primarily qualitatively, which means I try to always sort of recognize what mode of time am I in right now? What mode of time is happening? And I could say, oh, it's just based on my own head and where my head's at. Maybe. I don't know. Who knows? But and if I want to still say, well, ultimately, if I was measuring, yeah, it would still be measurable in the same kind of way. I'm not trying to get into some kind of like metaphysical, what is reality. I'm just sort of saying something simpler, which is that I think that the power of the idea of objective time is so strong in us that it takes a lot to get to a place where we begin to relate to our own experience of time as something that's always shifting, but has different qualities that we can come to recognize and kind of operate within, almost like different worlds. Like, and that part of what we're doing as we move through the day is modulating different kinds of temporal relationships or temporal experiences. And to just let yourself be in different modes of time. And we'll try to play with this a little bit in the meditation. I'm not sure how effective it will be as a meditation exercise, but I do kind of want to just play with it as a kind of experiment with consciousness, or a kind of exploration of things. But I'll just talk a little bit about what I mean when I talk about different modes of time. One of the agreements I made with myself this summer is that I wanted to freak out less, to have less like sort of like moments of kind of overwhelm. Oh my God, I have too much to do. Oh, I gotta, and then this thing happens, and where's my keys? And blah, 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 like these kind of little mini freakouts. It's not like a major part of my existence, but it's an irritating enough, and it felt like something that I could actually kind of isolate enough to work on. And so what I started to do is to tune into not the things that I was starting to worry about that were triggering the sense of panic, but the way in which my panic, this kind of panic, not like full on capital P panic, but like the sort of everyday freak out panic, was very much embedded in a certain mode of time where there isn't enough of it. There's too many things happening in too short a period, and there's not enough of it to properly digest it. And so it's a mode of time. And rather than try to deal with like, oh, well, just don't think, no, just be more rational about all the things you can. No, that wasn't going to do it. It's like I had to go, no, I don't want to be in that time world. I'm going to be in this time world. And it was inspired by my friend Antero Ali, who I think is actually facing his final clock ticks sometime soon, partly because he did choose not to go the chemo route with his cancer. If you know his works, they're really powerful and profound, very worthwhile exploration for people who like this kind of approach to things. Kind of a child of Robert Anton Wilson in a way, but with a very different ethical quality. Anyway, he talked about at a certain point in his life deciding not to hurry anymore, like just not to do it. Yeah, I miss planes sometimes. People can't make me hurry. I'm just not going to hurry anymore. Fuck it. And the quality of, to use a somewhat politically charged term right now, and it's unfortunate, but I still think it's important to think this way sometimes. There's a quality of sovereign choice to that. Like, oh no, I'm just not going to hurry. You can't make me. Nobody can make you hurry. You just hurry. So it's like what that means is saying, no, I'm not going to live in that time, that mode of time. I'm going to live in this kind of mode of time. And then in meditation, this, takes on all sorts of really subtle dimensions. And one way of navigating like just a given sitting session as you go between gross forms of distracted thoughts, subtler forms of distracted thoughts, events in the body, senses of calm that then get a little bit of sleepy, senses of insight that then get a little bit excitable, settling back into wide open awareness, focusing in on particular events as they arise. All of these different kind of dimensions on your sort of your hand controller for meditative space. They all have different modes of time associated with them, and indeed you can kind of navigate through your sitting by developing this sense of the qualities of time. And we don't really have a lot of language for a lot of it. So it's really a kind of existential, it's like a real feeling toned kind of thing, but we definitely know it as we move towards stillness. So stillness, of course, we recognize as a mode of meditation, a goal of some meditations. An aspect that sometimes naturally happens. You're just sitting there and not even meditating. Sometimes you're sitting by the side of a beautiful landscape or a river or something, and you notice that like you and the world just became utterly still. Even with the water was still flowing, there's this other quality of stillness. Well, that's this kind of mode of time. Can we call it timeless? Not quite, but it's getting there. And it's really quite an interesting way of going through and appreciating the variations of the day, particularly those edge cases. Like, I believe that let's say you're at a rock show or music that's can be ecstatic. So dance music or whatever, there's a crescendo in the dance music. There's a particularly driving psychedelic riff, jam in with the rock band or something, and you get into a kind of trance state. Greg and I were watching this Tuareg musician Bombino outside yesterday, and one of the features of the rhythm of that music is that it has this kind of circular loping quality. It's very trance music, and it's rooted in trance music. It's design, in other contexts, these are the same beats that will be used in whatever you want to call them, quasi-religious ceremonies where people are literally going into trance. So there's a kind of quality of trance beats that's quasi-objective, because our minds are more likely to go into that with certain kinds of beats and musical arrangements than others. And trance has a kind of time to it, or multiple kinds of time. Once you're starting to really slip into it, it's not just that you're going to another state. Notice that the altered state is a spatial metaphor, right? It's a spatial metaphor. It's harder to have a temporal metaphor because we don't have models of it. A state, it's easy. Like, we live in this huge space. You can go over here, you go up to the mountains, you go down to the deserts, you go to the ocean, you go into the city. We go to all these different places. So places and spaces are easy metaphors. Time is a lot trickier, but I think we are time much more than we are space or state. And so the encouragement to start to play with the what time world am I in now? Oh, notice the shift. Like, oh, I'm talking with Greg, blah 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 blah. It's very familiar, kind of like chatty, da 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 da. And then the music. Wait, let's listen to the music. Da, 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 da. Okay, all right. Oh wait, I can. Oh, I'm a little. Okay, here we go. I'm moving into a different quality of time. And by allowing time to be more multi-dimensional, to allow it to have multiple faces and to meet it in these different ways, again, I just think it's a really it's a subtle and enlivening practice to get closer to the root of what's happening, which is that it's flowing. It's always moving, and we are that movement on some deeper level. Uh, and it's also, and I would say it's also probably, to be honest, a bit of a protective measure, because as you age, there's something different in that quality of objective time. Like, if we're just relating to objective time, like, oh, I got to go work, I'm going to be there for 8 hours. Oh my God, that's so long. You're not even experiencing it yet. But you go, oh, 8 hours. What a nightmare. My whole day is gone to that thing. And it's this concept of like 8 hours. So there's a way that like we can be vexed by objective time, or we don't have enough time to do this, or that sense of not having enough time. That's another reason I think I'm spending a lot of time with this, because I have more of that sense now than I did when I was younger, not just because my life is more complicated, although it is a little more complicated, but it's also because I'm much more aware that I'm going to die, and that there is a finite amount of time. And in a way, there's a finite amount of time from a certain perspective about what time is, because maybe, it's an eternal recurrence and we're just, this thing again, and it's actually not linear, and you can go far out with this stuff. I'm not trying to go far out. I'm just gesturing towards the far out because it's in the room too. And when you say, yeah, there's a finite amount of time and then you're going to die, that's one world of time. That's not the truth about time. But it starts to have a little bit more punch to it. Like your birthday has a little bit more of a resounding, echo of doom to it. It's like a crypt door closing, like, oh, I'm 59, boom, never going back, and so there's this sense of a kind of claustrophobia of time, the way in which it, like, you can't get out of it, and it's like there's never enough, and it's always being worked, and it's like a core experience of samsara in from a Buddhist model. I mean, that's like core samsara. It's not just that you suffer. People talk about, it's a suffering, like bad things happening and good things happening. It's like, no, it's also that you are inside this grinder of time. Nothing's going to stop it. It's always not enough, and it's going to end before you've resolved your issues, And so that's like experiencing that level of the dread of time, which I think we also have a kind of political and environmental dimension. Like, I don't know about you, but like, what do we got? 13 months to the election? That's going to be a rough ass 13 months. And it's going to feel like time going towards this juncture of who knows what the fuck's going to happen. And then there's the bigger time of the climate crisis, in the sense of cyclicity breaking down. So like normal patterns of weather are off. So like our bodies are like, what part of the year is going on? Isn't it supposed to be, and like, so we're more unsettled by the way in which the year goes by and seasons go by. And then we all have this sense of like imminence and what's just immediately happening on the horizon all the time. So our time sense is very stressed these days. And so one feature of meditation that is a great gift is to give you, in that Dharmanaut way, in that way of you're learning how to navigate through these practice, as well as how to get in certain spaces and see certain things about reality. You're also learning how to navigate a flow, is that as meditation deepens, you have more facility with modulating time. You can drop in the midst of a very busy space and find stillness. And in my language, that's a kind of modulation of time. And I think that kind of modulation of time is also very helpful in this, political, ecological sense of like apocalyptic time, which is a kind of time. There's a very interesting way of saying like I've read like philosophical accounts of Christianity, trying to understand like what's specific about the Christian difference. And there's this great articulation of how there's like a special kind of time, because it's like the revealer came, the Messiah came, and then he left, and he's going to come back soon, right? And this is like 2,000 years ago. He's coming back real soon. There's people living now that will be around when he comes back. That was the Christian time frame. So everybody back then, he thought he's coming next week. He's coming in a month, maybe a year. And what does that feel like? Oh my God, like in like a month, the world's going to end. Whoa, like that is intense. That's intense time. It's a way of intensifying time. And there's something we love about intensifying time. That's part of what entertainment is about, or thrills and spills, roller coasters, certain drugs, loud music, light shows at EDM concerts. It's like that draw towards ecstasy, towards experiences of transcendence, is also an attraction to a kind of time that speeds up and almost transforms itself into something else, maybe even to a kind of space, a kind of a different sort of dimension. It can feel that way even. But with this Christian situation, it's happening in a historical sense. It's not just like they're getting high. It's that they're living in a historical moment that itself is just about to go asymptotic, to change. And that's where we are in a non-religious way. Everywhere you go, there's these asymptotes of like, oh, it's yeah, things are about to go like this, or they're about to go like this, like everything is kind of intensifying. And so we again are very, very stressed with time, and sitting and particularly developing stillness and being able to begin to layer or peel away the layers of different kinds of time that are in your mind. You know, the chatter, the ordinary chatter, maybe it's a little slow. And then like, oh, like if in your mind, if you're when paying attention to your thoughts as what kind of time are they operating in? Because they can be like, well, what am I going to do? You know, and it's that ruminative kind of like scratching, kind of, oh, yeah, what am I going to do? But okay, there's that kind of time. And then you'll remember something you got to do tomorrow. Oh, I forgot about that thing I got to do. And then you're in a different mode of time. It's like so time is constantly modulating once you approach it in this way, where it's like a fluid that's shifting all the time, rather than, oh yeah, well, but that's just a little feeling in my head. It's actually tick, tick, tick. Just let it go. No, you're flowing with this thing, and you're moving on these different levels, and you're trying to kind of explore, or you can explore how to modulate between them. So, as people know who've been with me for a while, like I look at these guided meditations, kind of like a sandbox where we're just like playing around with stuff. And sometimes things happen and sometimes they don't. I'm not trying to get anybody into a particular kind of state. And so I want to invite you to, I mean, that's what we'll be doing, is kind of resting with everything that we would normally do in meditation, but doing it from a way of developing a sensitivity, a qualitative sensitivity to the different modalities of time, the way time feels like it's flowing in these different kinds of conditions. There's been a robust chat going on that I've completely ignored, but thanks everyone for pinging and dinging. So yeah, let's sit now. So if you want to shut off your screens, if that makes things nicer, have a sip of tea. So yeah, find your seat, find your breath. You know, sit up in a way where you feel upright but relaxed. Keys to this are a sense of the chest slightly open, shoulders pouring down the back, a kind of lift in the spine, and a low curve in the lower back. You find that sweet balance between that quality of uprightness in your skeleton and the way your skeleton is balanced, so that you can apply minimal effort to keep your body erect. And as you find that skeletal coherence, you can let everything else relax. You'll find that in your own way. Take a moment to just check in with where you're at. How does your mind feel? How do the thoughts feel? What pace are they running? These qualities of time have a lot to do with the rates of things, their rhythms. When we have many thoughts piling up, they're racing. We're moving fast. So how fast are you moving? Is the mind moving? Don't even bother trying to change it. We're really just trying to see what's happening. And as we go through the meditation and you notice that you're thinking, you're captured by thought, you followed a train for a while, don't sweat it. As always, by recognizing that, you're already back. You don't even really have to do very much. But the one additional request or suggestion is that you get a sense of what mode of time those thoughts were operating in. Were they about something that was about to happen? Was there a sense of worry, which also has a quality of time to it? Was it circulating on itself, a kind of lazy drift? Well, it's a different kind of quality of motion, which is a different kind of time in the way that we're approaching. So feel free when you're in your thinking to get a little sense of, well, where are we? What's the rate here? What's the pace? What's the speed? Is it accelerating? Is it decelerating? It's actually a really nice way to work with thought, where you can see kind of what's going on without getting caught up in the material itself. But as you let the thoughts go, as you relax, let's find the breath. Don't do anything to the breath. Same question. What kind of time is the breath in? You know, we start to meditate, we go into like meditation breathing, but we breathe different ways all the day long. And those too have to do with different time worlds. How stressed we are, how frenetic we are we late? Are we relaxed? Is it the end of the evening? So as we tune into our breath now, again, where is it living? What kind of time is it unfolding? And then just by bringing our awareness to it, it most likely will settle down. Not always. If you're having a panic attack, it's not going to happen. But in this situation, it'll probably slow down. And all I'm asking at this point is to just follow it in and out, wherever it makes the most sense. And here I'm inviting you to relate with the breath, not just as an object of meditation or a set of feelings in your body that you can follow and appreciate, but also as a kind of portal into time and flow. You'll notice, of course, that the breath flows mostly continuously. But is it continuous? I invite you to see. Is it a flow or is there pause? As our breath slows down, we often find that at the end of the exhale, there's kind of a moment or two, sometimes quite longer, in deep relaxation, where nothing happens. Inhale doesn't start, diaphragm doesn't move. It's usually not very long, but as we follow the rhythm of the breath now, don't make anything happen, but see if you can tune into that gap. What does it feel like in your body, your mind? I like to think about this moment or the end of the exhale as the invitation to really relax, like let it all go. The template, you doing anything, meditation, and then you don't have to do anything at all for the breath to return back on the loop. It's like a little bardo in the inhale and exhale of your life. This little dropout. So, what happens if you just open to that brief moment where you relax, let go, don't do anything, and you're not really breathing in that moment? How how far can you go with that? How much can you allow that portal to open up a depth of stillness that you might not have known was available? And from this sense of time, how does it feel, this breathing inside and out? Many people compare it to waves on the shore, the surf going in and out, often not dissimilar pace. So, for a bit, sit at the shore side of your breathing and allow yourself to be entranced a bit with this pulse, the waves moving in and out, and then this strange moment of stillness within it. So be in the time of your breathing. And if you're able to touch this sense of stillness, notice if it begins to pervade your experience. So it's not just happening at a particular moment, that there's kind of a stillness that's more and more holding up, perhaps, your thinking occasionally, your sense of what's happening in the room, a more surface level of mind, and feel it as a kind of slowing. How does this opening up register as a shift in the unfoldment of time? Allow time to be taffy like. Notice as you tune into the feelings of the breath and the feelings of energy, fluctuations in the body, the sense of the body waking up or vibing, which often accompanies our growing sense of presence in sitting. See if there's other kinds of rhythms there, other pulses, literal or otherwise, that you can tune into. The waves of the breath moving in and out. What else? The sense of stillness. Any vibration you feel is a kind of time. Maybe you can feel your pulse, which, though as regular as our breathing, has a very different quality. Can you be in the time of your pulse? If not, stay with your breath. If you can find your pulse, sometimes by paying attention to the surface of your skin, maybe your hands or wrists, sometimes in the chest. People find it different places. But if you notice, it's not quite as regular. It's not, it's not as clockwork as you might think. There's a part in our time sense that really is drawn to repetition, to a familiar pulse, a predictable pulse. We like that. We like it in music. It helps us feel calm and centered or focused. But the pulse is a little different. It's got something else going on. And again, if you're having trouble finding it, don't worry. Uh, just stay with the breath. And as you become more settled in stillness, more comfortable and familiar with its mode of unfolding, then when you think or thoughts arise, it's even clearer that they're kind of like, again, different ways of relating to the flow, the fundamental flow of reality. They're usually speeding up. There's some different vibrational quality. And they're often about time or taking place in time. That's what the mind does. Back then, up then, what am I going to do then? Sometimes we meditate on philosophical problems that are kind of outside of that, but most of our chatter is addicted to its model of time, with a past where we did things that have effects we can't change, a future that's open, we have to decide, we're scared about things that might happen, we have to do things that we might not be able to do. It's a lot about time, possibilities, regrets, unfortunate events. But stillness is not playing that game. It doesn't care. So if you've been tracking the pulse or the breath, leave those now and really settle into stillness. If it helps, you can lean on that end of the exhale. If not, your object of meditation, so to speak, is that sense of stillness. And allow yourself to feel like you just might be able to slip a little bit out of time. Don't hold back. With stillness, time can seem viscous and very clear at the same time. Now, one final opening As you're sitting with the sense of stillness, there is, of course, the awareness of that stillness and of everything that's been happening. Allow yourself to get out of the way of that awareness and allow that awareness to be timeless. If that doesn't land, just make the gesture. You can imagine the essence of awareness as a kind of radiant presence that's so radiant and so present that it tastes like timelessness. And just open to the possibility that that radiance is available now. Working this way, things, of course, still come up. The sound starts of the car, and then it ends with the car. The breath is rising and falling. And yet, as you open to the sense of presence, of timeless stillness, and even deeper timelessness, when you engage or recognize these signature temporal events of rising and falling, they have a very different quality. So we're going to end the meditation, but just allow that ambient, timeless stillness to pervade as you come back and have a glass of water or turn on your screen and come back to the conversation.